Hello and welcome to Rolling with Two. I'm Will, and with me is my very dicey co-host,
Sarah.
And today we're doing a two-player perspective and accessibility of Rolling Realms. Sarah, why don't you tell us about the game?
All right. Rolling Realms is a roll and write featuring mini games that are based on various board games. That's quite a mouthful.
Yes.
But let's take a look at how this changes, if there's any changes, for a two-player perspective.
There are no changes for a two-player perspective. There is no bot, so no nanobot. It's a player count neutral rule set.
Which I guess can be, it's positive and negative depending upon how you look at it. There's no player interaction, which again, if using other terminology, it's multiplayer solitaire. And that can either be a positive or negative depending upon your likes or dislikes.
Yeah. I mean, it is a regular thing to expect from a roll and write game. Mm-hmm. So it fits that category, but yeah, that's more or less a personal choice,
right,
as to whether or not that's your cup of tea or not.
Not exactly. So I think we should move on then to accessibility.
Okay.
So some of the things that are not so good about the game is there is some contrast issue with some of the cards. The text at the top, it's all done in white on all the cards, and some of them are harder to read than others, especially when they did bold white, but then they did a more like a lighter grayscale type of white, which it's not so great here because it's really hard to read. The good news is all of this text that's at the top is in the rule book. So, you can always reference the rule book if you can't read the card. But considering every player is going to have a set of these cards in front of them, it would have been nicer if that had been a little clearer.
Yeah. The other thing is the contrast on the cards. Yes. Certain icons just don't show up as well.
Yeah, there's some yellow icons. There's coins as well as stars. And especially on a couple of them, because of the graphic design, there's a pyramid one where there's stars in between the little boxes, and it's really hard to read or to see that there's stars in between those boxes. So, because it's all on white. I mean, everything else is really good contrast because usually white is a good background.
Yeah.
But when you have a lighter colored icon, that does make it more difficult to see.
However, all the information is open. Mm-hmm. So if you have someone with a sighted, basically someone to help you yes. sighted wise, that won't be much of an issue.
Right.
But you had an issue with the dice.
Yeah. Again, this for me, I do have long fingers, but I have still smaller hands. So I had trouble rolling these dice. I most of the time rolled them individually. And even then, it still felt like they rolled the same numbers all the time. So those who might have this could be different mobility issues for different people. For some people, the big dice might be a benefit. But for some, it could be a detriment. If you've got smaller hands, that could be harder to roll. So it's really going to depend on what your challenge is with mobility and dice, but I had kind of trouble with these.
Speaking of benefit, the dice do make a good accessibility feature for those to see
right.
the dice in the middle of the table once they do roll.
Right.
So, yeah.
It's kind of a mixed bag, as well as the pips are recessed. They're also hexes, which is really super cute, and it's very thematic. But for someone who may not be able to see but could feel, you can also feel the pips, also if you really needed to. But again, generally speaking, if you're playing with a large group of people, having large dice to be able to see around the table is a good idea.
Any other accessibility issues?
The only other thing is some of the markings you need to make need to be small. And again, that could be challenging. You are writing on these cards, so that could be a little bit challenging.
And they are dry erase.
Right.
So one option to help with that is if you go to your local office store or Amazon and look for the finest tip dry erase pens, mm-hmm. You could have a better experience filling in the smaller boxes.
Yes, but that's about it, because what it does right is as we've covered is it's all open information and the dice are highly visible. So it does a lot to help different accessibility issues, even though it does still contain some.
So would you recommend this as a 2-player game?
As a 2-player game, yes. It is pretty much player count independent. It almost doesn't matter how many players you're playing this with, but if you're looking for a good 2-player experience, this one is.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, it comes down to, even on a 2-player count, our end scores can just be like decimal points apart.
Yes.
So it's a very tight, very exciting game when you're done with the 3 rounds and you're getting to tally everything up, figure out what the scoring is, and just see how close you were.
Yeah. So even though there's nothing that has player interaction, it can still have really close games. So it's still a very exciting game and a challenging puzzle. So yeah, it's still very good.
Now, would you say this is good accessibility-wise?
I would say yes, as long as somebody has help, either technology assistive devices or somebody else with good eyesight to help them with it. But generally speaking, this does have a lot going for it.
Yeah, and everything we mentioned, I feel, yes, might be a detriment to some people, and it's just more of be aware of it. And other things in the very same breath are good for entirely other accessibility issues. Like I say with the dice, hard to handle, good to see.
Right.
So yes, very mixed bag, but I agree. Yes, it's accessible with a little bit of help, especially when it comes to the contrast issues. So I think that'll do it for us here at Rolling with Two. Where can they reach us on our social medias?
Well, we are on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Rolling with Two. That's TWO. And of course, we're on YouTube. Please like and subscribe.
And why would you ever roll with just one when you can be rolling with two?